Nearly 2,000 years ago, a man sat alone at the edge of a military camp somewhere along the Danube River, writing private thoughts he never intended anyone to read. He was arguably the most powerful person on earth at that time, the Emperor of Rome, and yet his words were not about conquest, wealth, or glory. They were about humility, discipline, and the relentless pursuit of virtue. That man was Marcus Aurelius, and those private notes became one of the most enduring philosophical works in human history, Meditations. Marcus Aurelius was born in 121 AD in Rome to a prominent family with deep connections to imperial power. He was adopted by Emperor Antoninus Pius and groomed for leadership from an early age. Philosophers shaped his education, particularly Stoic thinkers who taught him that the quality of a life is measured not by what happens to you, but by how you respond. He became emperor in 161 AD and ruled until his death in 180 AD, a reign marked by constant military campaigns, plagues, political instability, and enormous personal tragedy. He lost multiple children. He faced betrayal. He endured a devastating pandemic that killed millions across the empire. And through all of it, he kept writing. Meditations was never written for publication. It was a private journal, a personal exercise in Stoic philosophy, a daily practice of self-examination. The text is divided into 12 books, each containing reflections of varying length, some just a single sentence, others several paragraphs deep. They were written primarily in Greek, the language of philosophy at the time, and they speak directly to himself, using the second person throughout. He is not teaching. He is reminding himself how to live. The philosophy at the heart of Meditations is Stoicism, a school of thought founded in Athens around 300 BC by Zeno of Citium. Stoicism teaches that human beings cannot control external events, but they can absolutely control their judgments and responses to those events. This distinction is foundational. Marcus returns to it again and again throughout the text. The Stoics divided all things into two categories: things within our control, which are our thoughts, values, and actions, and things outside our control, which include literally everything else, other people's behavior, weather, fortune, illness, death. Wisdom, according to this view, begins with accepting that division and acting accordingly. One of the most powerful and recurring themes in Meditations is what Marcus calls the obstacle as opportunity. He writes that the impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way. This is not merely optimistic reframing. It is a structured philosophical approach to adversity. Rather than viewing hardship as a reason to despair or retreat, Marcus trains himself to see every difficulty as a material for virtue. A soldier grows brave in battle. A physician grows skilled through difficult cases. A philosopher grows wise through hardship. The obstacle is not separate from the path forward, it is the path forward. Another central theme is impermanence, which Marcus explores with striking clarity. He frequently reminds himself that all things pass, that emperors and empires alike crumble into dust, that fame is fleeting and meaningless against the backdrop of eternity. He writes about looking at the courts of ancient kings and finding only emptiness and silence. He urges himself to remember that even Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Augustus, men who shook the foundations of history, are now as forgotten as their servants. This is not meant to produce despair. It is meant to liberate. If fame and achievement are ultimately temporary, then their absence should not trouble us, and their pursuit should never compromise our integrity. Marcus also writes extensively about the present moment. He is deeply concerned with the human tendency to live either in regret about the past or anxiety about the future, and he repeatedly calls himself back to the here and now. He writes that the only life a person actually possesses is the present moment, because the past is gone and the future is not yet here. This focus on presence has striking parallels to modern mindfulness practices, and it is one reason why Meditations resonate so strongly with contemporary readers. The ancient wisdom and the modern science of attention are pointing toward the same truth: presence is not a luxury, it is the foundation of a well-lived life. Perhaps the most radical and counterintuitive idea in Meditations is Marcus's insistence on loving difficult people. He writes that when you wake in the morning, you should tell yourself that today you will encounter people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, and envious. But you should not be surprised or angered by this, because these people are made of the same material as you, they are human, they are fallible, and they are doing the best they can with the understanding they have. This perspective, sustained by the Stoic belief that all humans share a rational nature and are therefore connected, allowed Marcus to govern with remarkable patience and restraint. Despite absolute power, he famously avoided the cruelty and tyranny that consumed many Roman emperors. The theme of duty is equally central to his writing. Marcus never wanted to be emperor. He genuinely preferred the life of a philosopher and frequently expresses exhaustion with the burdens of rule. But he accepted his role completely and performed it without complaint, because the Stoics believed that each person has a social duty determined by their position in life. A father must father. A citizen must contribute. An emperor must govern. The personal preferences of the individual are far less important than the obligations attached to their role. This acceptance of duty without resentment is one of the most demanding aspects of Stoic practice, and Marcus held himself to it relentlessly. On the topic of death, Meditations is uniquely honest and remarkably unafraid. Marcus meditates on mortality regularly, not as an exercise in morbidity but as a method of clarification. He writes that it is not death that a man should fear, but the life never begun. By keeping death present in his awareness, he keeps his priorities sharp. He asks himself constantly whether his current actions are worthy of the limited time available. This practice, known in Latin as memento mori, remember that you will die, was a cornerstone of Stoic daily life. For Marcus, contemplating death was not pessimistic. It was the ultimate motivator for living with intention and integrity. What makes meditation so enduring is not just its philosophical content, but its honesty. Marcus does not write as a sage who has solved all problems. He writes as a man who struggles, who fails, who must remind himself of the same lessons repeatedly because they are genuinely difficult to live. He catches himself being irritated with others and corrects himself. He notices self-pity creeping in and pushes it away. He acknowledges the pull of comfort and pleasure and writes sternly against surrendering to them. This transparency makes the text feel less like a philosophical treatise and more like a conversation between a man and his better self, a model that readers across centuries have found both humbling and inspiring. The legacy of Meditations is extraordinary. It has influenced philosophers, leaders, writers, and thinkers across every era since its rediscovery in the Renaissance. Theodore Roosevelt carried a copy while exploring the Amazon. Frederick the Great kept it close during military campaigns. Bill Clinton has cited it as one of his most revisited books. Tim Ferriss, who has introduced Stoicism to millions through modern media, frequently describes Meditations as the single most impactful book in his personal library. The philosopher Pierre Hadot argued that Meditations represents the purest surviving example of philosophy as a lived practice rather than an academic exercise, not ideas to be studied but tools to be used daily. Psychologists have noted striking similarities between Stoic practice and modern cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. The CBT technique of cognitive restructuring, identifying automatic negative thoughts and consciously replacing them with more rational interpretations, mirrors almost exactly what Marcus does on every page of Meditations. Albert Ellis, one of the founders of CBT, explicitly acknowledged Stoic philosophy as a major influence on his work.